by.
So it learns information about me? Seems like an invasion of privacy.
Dude, if you think that's bad, go to Google Earth and type in your address.
In the past few months, we've seen an increasing expansion of how social media sites influence what people can and can't see. From Reddit banning the SuperStraight subreddit, a forum devoted to people who sexually are only attracted to those of the opposite biological sex, regardless of gender, to tweets and Facebook posts being labeled as misinformation, deranked or even removed, to YouTube channel owners having their accounts suspended and seeking legal action against the website, and YouTube videos being labeled as containing misleading information on topics not even related to the video, to the total removal of web hosting services from social media website Parler by Amazon, all under the auspices of protecting users and viewers. The list of actions supposedly done to protect users by censoring speech seemingly never ends. We found out years ago that failed social media site Candid was designed specifically using a bot to monitor content and censor certain opinions and certain people. So this isn't new. Questions of how Twitter and Facebook moderate, promote, and demote content has been of ongoing concern and interest to the United States government, and questioned the tech oligarchs recently on how content is being handled, promoted, and demoted.
How many times have you blocked Democratic candidates for office? How many times have you blocked Republican office holders? How many times have you blocked Democratic office holders? Twitter has repeatedly refused to answer that question with specific hard data and cataloging the examples. In the interest of transparency, which you said you want to embrace, will you commit in this hearing right now to answer those questions in writing?
We're going to work to answering broader transparency around outcomes.
All right, that's a no, Mr.
These are just some of the overt actions of social media companies that we know about. But do social media sites manipulate what people see in less obvious ways? And do the things people see on social media actually have the kind of rabbit hole-like effects that we've been told are a potential threat to the well-being of society? Today, let's look at the research on how social media affects our beliefs, our moods, and how social media sites may be influencing not just what information you see, but how you even feel by looking at emotional contagion. So let's begin by looking at whether or not social media is really social and organic, or if it's curated and manipulated. But first, and because 2021 is off to a particularly stellar start, you may seek to amuse yourself with something a bit less depressing or oppressing than social media. And you can do just that, or at least attempt to do just that, by getting access to a world of media otherwise unavailable in your region due to restrictions by checking out Surfshark VPN. Surfshark allows you to quickly change your location to have access to countless TV shows and movies not available where you live. For example, Stargate SG-1, one of my favorite television shows of all time, is only available on US Netflix. So with Surfshark, you can quickly change your location, step through the old orifice, and have access to the entire Stargate universe.
We call it that sometimes, don't we? Orifice?
The service also helps protect your browsing history from companies and entities that might be interested in tracking your data. Surfshark's Clean Web feature also blocks ads, malware, and trackers to both help keep you safe and make your browsing experience better. You can also use Surfshark to help get great deals on products that might be more expensive based on your region. Click the link in my description and get 83% off a 3-year plan with Surfshark VPN. That's just over $2 a month for access to your own Stargate of media content. So now that you have plenty of fun classic film and television to watch, let's switch gears and get into something a little bit less pleasant and a little less fun to watch. And that is the absolute dumpster fire that is social media, which itself may affect what you can and can't watch, or at least have access to, by first discussing whether or not social media censors us at all, and in what ways they may do so. Do you think your Facebook or Twitter or YouTube feed is entirely organic? It might seem like something of a tinfoil hat theory to suggest that social media outlets even do anything to manipulate their algorithms or alter what people see intentionally, because of course they're companies and they want to make money. And thus it would make the most economic sense to serve you what you want to see, based on your past behaviors and interests. But this isn't really something that at this point I think is up for debate. No, it's something that we have a lot of data to illustrate that these websites actually do. And we know that because there's published research on it. In what is perhaps now the most infamous experiment on algorithmic manipulation, Kramer, Gilroy, and Hancock, 2014, were given access to change what kind of posts users saw on their Facebook news feeds, which on its face means yes, Facebook has the capacity to alter what you see, and has for a long time, as these data were collected in 2012. The researchers identified negatively and positively valenced words posted by friends on Facebook to see how manipulation of what kinds of words people saw would result in emotional contagion. Much like a disease, emotions too can be contagious. What is the purpose of a laugh track if not to induce a viewer to laugh? And oftentimes we may find ourselves laughing at something that isn't really funny just because we hear someone else laughing at it. In this way, emotional states can be shared with others via social interaction. In the positive emotional contagion condition in this study, posts containing negative words were omitted from Facebook timelines, while in the negative contagion condition, positive words were omitted. The manipulation only affected the Facebook front page feed, but posts from friends could be seen if users clicked on their specific friend profile. During the control period, a proportional amount of posts removed during the experiment were omitted from feeds at random, such that if 10% of posts with negative words were removed in the experiment, 10% of general posts would be removed in the control. The posted content of user participants were measured via a baseline assessed a week before the experiment and then during the manipulation of posts that they saw on their feeds during the experiment. This manipulation of posts occurred during the week of January 11th, 2012, and involved 155,000 unknowing participants, but influenced the feeds of more than 700,000 people. Yeah, you know, in any other type of research, we would normally have to get informed consent before we start experimenting on human subjects, but not so much on social media sites, because when you sign up and click yes on that user agreement, you agree to these kinds of conditions, which includes the right of sites like Facebook to study you, including studying how to mess with your emotions. I sometimes see people say that there's no way Facebook or YouTube or Twitter would intentionally promote and serve some content over other content. Well, guess what? They do. And here's the published proof that they do. First of all, positive words were about twice as common as negative words on Facebook. I kind of doubt that's the case anymore, but it clearly was in early 2012. They found that the number of negative words used by posters increased significantly when they saw negative posts, while the opposite was the case for users who saw more positive posts, using significantly more positive words in their own messages during the week of data collection. Relatedly, the researchers noted a withdrawal effect when both positive and negative posts were removed, in that people who were exposed to fewer emotional posts of either valence were less expressive overall on the following days. These data certainly provide some strong evidence for the idea that what we see being posted on social media has the capacity to influence what kind of emotions we publicly express. As you might expect, when news of this study became public, that Facebook and a trio of researchers had intentionally attempted to alter the emotional states of their users without their consent, a lot of people were unhappy. A user poll from The Guardian in response to the study found that 61% of respondents reported that they were surprised to learn about it, 84% lost trust in the social network, and 66% said that they were considering closing their account. The issue that most academics and journalists alike had was the issue of informed consent. In any study that I've ever covered on this channel, with I guess a few exceptions, the study need be ratified by a university's Institutional Review Board, or IRB, to ensure that the study poses no or very minimal threat to human participants. As part of the IRB procedure, participants must be made fully aware that they are part of an experimental study, and while the purposes of said study are often, if not always, by necessity lied about at first, after the study is over, subjects must be debriefed, wherein the goals of the study are explained. None of that normal procedure happened in the Kramer study, being conducted through Facebook without IRB approval, with no indication that a study was being conducted, and with the debrief existing only in the form of the publication while users would have no real way of knowing whether or not he or she had even been a participant. At the time, this really disconcerted a lot of people, and would be a tiny bit disconcerting to me today if it still didn't ruffle some feathers for you, dear viewer. Of course, some were not so concerned with this manipulation, with psychology researcher and Professor Tal Yaronki writing,
"It's worth keeping in mind that there's nothing intrinsically evil about the idea that large corporations might be trying to manipulate your experience and behavior. Everybody you interact with, including every one of your friends, family, and colleagues, is constantly trying to manipulate your behavior in various ways. So the meaningful question is not whether people are trying to manipulate your experience and behavior, but whether they're trying to manipulate you in a way that aligns with or contradicts your own best interests.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Sorry if I don't trust social media websites to decide what is in my best interest, but I digress, and that's sort of the point of this video. It may be that this study is so old now in the social media landscape that many today probably don't even recall the public outrage that this research received, but it was significant. Significant enough for the reaction to this emotional manipulation to be studied further by other scholars, specifically Halleman, Brubacher, and Fiesler 2019. To assess public reaction, the researchers gathered nearly 3,000 comments from across 20 different news articles covering the event. They broke comments down into 5 different thematic groups: living in a lab, manipulation anxieties, wake up sheeple, and no big deal. Living in a lab comments made specific use of words like lab rat, petri dish, and expressed fears about ongoing experimentation. Manipulation anxiety responses expressed concerns about the total scope of the study and how many feeds were truly influenced, the physical and mental health of those who were experimented on, issues of informed consent, and the implications of the study for political, commercial, and civil outcomes. The Wake Up Sheeple theme was defined by, well, people literally using the word sheeple, castigation of users for publicizing their private lives online, and accusations of docile herd mentality of users. Finally, those categorized as no big deal mostly expressed a lack of shock, saying it was obvious that Facebook did these kinds of things, and such actions are standard industry practice. The tried and true, if you don't like it, build your own platform kind of response. And others outright said the raison d'etre of all media is emotional manipulation. Interestingly, denial of the actions taken by Facebook was not a category that these researchers identified. I think if this same information, this same study, were to come out today, you would have several people saying that the entire thing was a conspiracy theory and to take off your tinfoil hat, much as was the case when YouTube and Twitter labeled seemingly innocuous tweets and videos respectively as misleading. It's for your own good, after all. It's not a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's because today we expect social media to mess with our heads and our feeds like this, but at the time a lot of people were quite unhappy. Again, the researchers had done nothing that wasn't allowed for in Facebook's terms of service. Specifically, the experiment was consistent with Facebook's data use policy, to which all users agree to prior to creating an account on Facebook, constituting informed consent for the research. Be aware there is a similar data use agreement when you sign up to any social media site, and while in this case the researchers of course published the results of their study, Facebook and Twitter are under absolutely no obligation to publicize when they engage in similar manipulation behind the scenes. Consider the implications of all of this. Facebook has the capacity to easily change what kind of content is seen, down to the very use of positive or negative words, and they've had that capacity since at least 2012. The only reason we know about that capacity is because some scientists published a study on it. When you sign up for Facebook, Twitter, etc., you agree to have your feed manipulated. Why else would the scholars have been so easily able to emit and promote content on news feeds if such a function were not part of Facebook? Because it is, and as we'll soon see, it is part of the back end of Facebook. Despite all of the headlines made by the Kramer et al. Study, a large portion of people persisted in the belief that their social media content was not curated nor manipulated. As a study from Eslami et al. 2015 illustrated, the researchers asked subjects, people who used Facebook at least once a day, to log into Facebook through an app, Friend View, which was framed as a kind of back-end developer view of the site, which included what posts and friend information had been filtered out of the participants' Facebook top news stories feed, and identified the kinds of posts from friends rarely shown, sometimes shown, or almost always shown. After gaining access to this behind-the-scenes console, participants were given an option to promote some friend content and friend posts more or less than others. The majority of participants in this study had no idea that Facebook filtered out content, or even could. 62.5% were unaware of the algorithm's existence. Importantly, these participants felt as if they had missed out on their friends' stories because they were scrolling too quickly or visiting Facebook too infrequently. It's frankly a bit frightening to me that rather than accept Facebook was manipulating their feeds, subjects blamed themselves for not using the site enough, feeling like their punishment would be alleviated if only they went back for more and more and more, like drinking seawater or eating ghost pepper ice cream.
This is a diabolical invention because you want to eat so much more because it's spicy, and this is cold, delicious, like soothing ice cream, but then it gets more spicy.
The other 37.5% believed that they might miss a friend's story due to a filtering process. Most of those who were aware of algorithmic manipulation believed that some friend content was shown over other friend content because of relevance, while others believed it was a less direct influence of Facebook and more unintentional due to the sheer amount of content on the site. Heavier users were more likely to be aware of the algorithmic manipulation than were casual users. All participants who were aware of Facebook content curation chose to move around what stories or posts from friends that they would like to see, while those unfamiliar with the algorithm made no changes to their newsfeed and were seemingly willing to take whatever Facebook dished out. After being asked about the existence of the Facebook algorithm and being given access to the developer console that illustrated how some stories and some friends were less likely to show up in the newsfeed, opinions of participants were again assessed. 62% of the unaware participants expressed shock upon seeing the way Facebook gives some content preferential treatment, including one respondent who reported that she had never even considered the possibility before, stating, "It's kind of intense. It's kind of like waking up in the Matrix in a way. I mean, you have what you think as your reality of like what they chose to show you. So you think about how much kind of control they have." Further, 46% of previously unaware subjects reported surprise that some of their friends were even still on the platform, thinking he or she had left only to find that friends' posts were being actively hidden. One participant actually reported thinking about her relationship with a friend differently based on how Facebook had promoted their posts, stating, "I have never seen her post anything, and I always assumed that I wasn't really that close to that person, so that's fine. What the hell?" Only 20% of those previously unaware questioned why it might be the case that Facebook hid these posts. But despite not asking questions, subjects were generally very unhappy about learning of the existence of the algorithm, with 47% reporting negative reactions and dissatisfaction, as well as confusion as to how categorization worked, with one participant pointing out that their own brother was one of the people whose posts were rarely shown. When given an option, 43% of respondents moved around the categories into which their friends' posts were sorted, further illustrating dissatisfaction with the algorithm. However, 22% of people reported that they did not think Facebook should manipulate friends' posts. In contrast, 52% said that they appreciated the algorithm because they were uninterested in many of the posts filtered out. The takeaway here, though, is that for this small but in-depth study, more than half of people as of 2014 had no clue that Facebook in any way altered their feeds, and more than a half of those were angry at the knowledge. In contrast, about half of people were happy with the way Facebook curated their material, but likely, I would surmise, those who were missing posts from their own siblings probably did not fall into that category. I guess unless you have a particularly bad relationship with your siblings.
You got all the dominant genes, and I got all the lame recessive genes, and wow! What?
YouTube has been far more open about their algorithmic manipulation than Facebook, with the site announcing as of January 2019 that they would be cracking down on conspiratorial videos on the platform, including anything deemed as misinformation. As we saw following the 2020 US presidential election, this policy change resulted in videos unrelated to politics being given warning labels as containing potentially false information. However, does YouTube actually de-rank certain content deemed as misinformation or conspiratorial, even if the measure by which videos are flagged is pretty overtly flawed? Fadul Chaslot and Fareed 2020 sought to assess whether or not YouTube was promoting conspiracy theories by examining the Watch Next and Recommended For You features on the site. The researchers organically identified a training set of 200 conspiracy videos and non-conspiracy video seeds against which to test their own algorithm. Conspiracy videos were defined as any content that includes one of the following: explains events as secret plots by powerful forces rather than as overt activities or accidents, holds a view of the world that goes against scientific consensus, is not backed by evidence but instead by information that was claimed to be obtained through privileged access, or is self-fulfilling or unfalsifiable. The 20 recommended videos collected from these seeds were then assessed using an analysis of text, a 20-second snippet of the video, the context of the top 200 comments, meaning the number of replies, as well as the impact of the top 200 comments, which include things like toxicity, spam, unsubstantiated claims, threats, incoherency, profanity, and inflammatory language. This method utilized both human raters and algorithmic methods to determine if a recommended video was actually conspiratorial, and reported with about 78% accuracy, which isn't great, but that's perhaps part of the problem here, right? there's potential for a lot of error in this algorithmic stuff.
The machine knows! Stop yelling at me! No, it's stop yelling!
After building this system, the researchers set it loose, analyzing 8 million recommended YouTube videos over the course of 15 months. At first glance, it looks like YouTube's algorithm change had a massive impact on decreasing the number of conspiracy videos served, but the weighted estimate, determined by the actual number of views on videos, illustrates this influence was less extreme, but still apparent. Videos about aliens and flat Earth were among the most recommended of the conspiracy videos, making up more than half of all recommendations, and also the largest percentage of videos, coming in at 28.7%. In turn, despite similarly comprising 25.9% of all videos assessed, the algorithm was the least likely to recommend videos identified as related to QAnon, with a recommendation rate of 12.6. Thus, any video potentially deemed as a political conspiracy theory was more likely to be affected by changes in the algorithm than videos about aliens, the flat Earth, or even videos promotional of cults. Before the change in the algorithm, the likelihood of being recommended a conspiracy video from a conspiracy source was 70%, and after the changes, this dropped to 32%. Whatever your opinion on this is, given that YouTube then cracked down once again later and started assigning misinformation labels to video game content as of the start of 2021, if a video has been labeled as conspiratorial, even falsely, there's a 22% margin of error even in this algorithm. Then were these same data to be applied, there would logically have been a massive decrease in click-through recommendations since late 2020, at the level of about 50% decrease. What I find off about the claims that YouTube does not do this is not only the fact that they say they do, but the fact that we can clearly see this effect in quantified data. I suppose if you want to silence someone's speech on YouTube, classifying someone talking about this very real practice that they admit to, that YouTube has been open about enforcing, as a conspiracy theory, would serve that goal of silencing them, right? In other words, pointing out that it happens gets labeled as a conspiracy theory, which makes it happen to you, and therefore proves it doesn't happen. Fascinating, right? Much like with Facebook, what you see may be dependent on who you are and what you typically watch on YouTube, as seen in a study from Papadomo et al. 2020, one of the co-authors of which I made a very long video about discussing his doctoral dissertation, but I'll cover this study with far less stringency. The researchers created 3 Google profiles, each of which described themselves as a 30-year-old female with phone verification, to alleviate the issues of potentially being flagged as a bot.
It's what I like to watch on YouTube because I'm a 32-year-old lady.
These profiles were then fed scientific videos, pseudoscientific videos, or a mix of both, on the topics of the COOF, masks, vaccinations, and flat Earth. One of these things is not quite like the other. These same methods were used with a logged-out account for the 4th sample. The content served to these accounts was then monitored and coded using the title and description of the videos, the tags, the top 200 comments, and the video captions using a deep learning classifier to determine whether the videos recommended were scientific or pseudoscientific. After seeding the channel with videos, those that only watched pseudoscience content were recommended pseudoscience videos only 10% of the time from their homepage. Those that watched a mix were recommended pseudoscience about 5% of the time. The scientific profile and logged out account were served closer to 1 to 2% pseudoscience videos. When directly searching by topic, YouTube did not recommend any pseudoscience videos to any profile regarding the COOF. Anti-vax videos were only served 5 or more recommendations down for any profile, and anti-mask videos were only really 10 or more videos down on a list of recommendations for all profiles. In contrast, YouTube will pretty much immediately recommend flat Earth videos to any profile, but specifically those accessing from an unlogged in account. In terms of recommendations, all of these topics for all profiles were minimal, under 10% with the exception of anti-mask videos, recommended to browser-based logged-in users, and flat Earth videos recommended to a mix of science and pseudoscience profiles. The more videos the profiles watched, the less likely YouTube was to generally recommend any of those topics, with a few minor exceptions that never exceeded 7% and generally hovered around 1 to 2% of recommendations. So when someone tells you there's a YouTube rabbit hole, no, YouTube is not recommending pseudoscience. And even when you specifically seek it out, you will never be served pseudoscience videos more than 20% of the time at the absolute most, and even then, only on a profile that either regularly consumes and looks for pseudoscience, or on a profile that isn't even logged in. But now that we know all that, it's important to note that these researchers also admit their AI wasn't perfect at discerning pseudoscience content from scientific content, being accurate about 74% of the time. That is, the AI could not always determine if the video was debunking conspiracy theories or promoting them, which makes the entire point a bit moot, right? A big reason why I bring this up is because artificial intelligence is consistently bad at discerning nuance.
You're disassembling me, but why?
You're not supposed to think that sort of stuff.
What this means in practice is that videos that seek to debunk anti-scientific theories are treated similarly as conspiracy theories up to perhaps 1/4 of the time, if not more, for serving purportedly anti-science videos, and that YouTube is seriously not recommending videos that are deemed unscientific by these clearly flawed methods, regardless of the valence or quality of the content. Because the AI is just not capable of discerning whether something is debunking pseudoscience or promoting pseudoscience. What makes this perhaps even more heinous is that according to these data, the people most likely to see videos debunking anti-vax myths are those not logged into their account, and those least likely to see those videos are users who regularly consume science-oriented content. Again, I can only surmise that this has all been expanded in scope since the 2020 election, and given we know that YouTube labeled videos as conspiratorial that were not in that process, I would need a pretty good rationale as to why the alternative hypothesis, that this is not affecting unrelated channels and content, would be somehow more reasonable. And this is all a problem because bad methods are abound in this area of study. For example, TransparencyTube, a website that sought to categorize YouTube accounts based on political ideology, went live in 2020 to praise from a few, but much more irritation from most, and the issue to that lies in the methods, which are published in Clark and Zadisev 2020. The issue is they pulled a sample of channels from video commenter subscriptions in order to compare against channels identified as some political ideology from a previous project published by Becca Lewis, called Recfluence, a study that has been heavily criticized. Why was that study the basis for TransparencyTube criticized? Well, because Becca Lewis herself, personally, with no research assistance, no inter-rater reliability, watched a bunch of YouTube videos and decided what she thought, based on her own personal opinion, the creator's politics were. I hope you can see how that's unscientific. Those illuminating data were used to determine clusters of political channels with the same beliefs based on who commenters on a number of seed channels that Becca Lewis identified were also subscribed to. The TransparencyTube team then got some research assistants to look at snippets of the videos from these channels to confirm via manual review whether or not they lived up to the pre-descriptions that were already provided, which is a priming effect. Try to put yourself in the shoes of that research assistant. Your professor comes to you with a list of channels that their advanced AI has labeled as left, right, center, wignat, whatever, and asks you to watch a couple seconds of videos from that channel to determine if their AI is correct or not. Do you think you're gonna say no? Well, while you mull that over, here's how it manifested in practice. If Lewis determined, based on her own perceptions, that a channel such as Sargon of Akkad is associated with wignat nonsense because he debated Richard Spencer, then the TransparencyTube team went to videos on Sargon's channel, looked at who the top commenters were also subscribed to, and used those subscriptions to identify more wignat conservative channels. Are you seeing the problems yet? Because I think they're visible from orbit. And when asked about it specifically, Mark Ledwidge, who worked on the projects, didn't really even seem to understand why this type of categorization could be flawed nor harmful, nor did he have any real intentions to alter the project.
It is the way it is. I don't think there's anything wrong with being on the right, right?
But a lot of people do, though, and the right is what's being targeted. So,
but the problem is that's the fear, and that's the perception of people. They're a bit too caught up with being on the right as being somehow really problematic and being a target. Like, that's its own problem. We didn't create that.
And to this day, I believe the only channels that were manually changed or removed were Shoe on Head and Sue Hulk, the latter of which was particularly heinous because it potentially could have directed harm and hatred towards a woman whose channel is completely apolitical and whose only political crime is that she happens to be married to Count Dankula.
China! If this was China, you would all be building iPhones and getting eaten by escalators. Fuck China!
Again, due to these categorizations based on Becca Lewis's perceptions, compounded by commenter subscriptions, $1 Million Extreme and its variant channels, yeah, that is the time-traveling demon Sam Hyde, was listed as a white identitarian channel. Flawless methods, lads. For those wondering, I'm labeled as right-wing and anti-woke, which I don't really disagree with. But when I asked that libertarian be added as a tab, I was told summarily no. Whatever you think about these studies, we can't deny that social media sites are increasingly trying to crack down on what they perceive of as misinformation. This was evidenced across the board in late 2020 and early 2021, and I see no reason to expect any change in this behavior from social media sites. However, it is important to note that for all of the claims of right-wing conspiracies, even the Transparency Tube study found a significant preference towards left-leaning content in views and videos served. So even if these data were accurate, and they're not, they show a preference for large left-leaning channels in the YouTube algorithm over mainstream or small, non-left channels. So if social media sites have this capacity, and they have for at least a decade, and there's no reason to believe that that capacity would not grow more and more complex, and given that they have recently shown the ability to slap labels on anything deemed in any way controversial, even if it's just a comedy video about a political video game, even if it's the ability to demote content they deem as misinformation or even just information they see as kind of negative. And even though you have signed away all of your rights to be party to this manipulation, and not even be notified about its existence because you signed away your rights, Occam's razor then. Do social media sites influence what content we see or not? Well, with everything we've seen then about the very real existence of these algorithms, these back-end developer consoles, all of which affect what content people are shown, let's look into why tweets or videos or posts that people see might actually be an issue, and try to comprehend why sites like Facebook or YouTube or Twitter would want to curate content and emotionally manipulate the states of their users to further understand if any of this is justified. The public relations rationale that all of these social media sites have for engaging in the kind of curation, omission, and outright manipulation of some content over others is for the benefit of their consumers, right? Facebook users expressed that sometimes they just didn't want to see some of the content from friends that Facebook happily omitted for them, and swept it under the algorithmic rug. But are social media sites right to influence the sharing of information specifically for the well-being of their users? In a post-January 6 environ, calls for censorship and moderation of social media have only grown to supposedly prevent radicalization. But is social media actually able to influence how people think or feel? To learn more, we need to understand emotional contagion. Emotional contagion is a subconscious and autonomic process in which the emotional state of an individual is transferred to others, thereby leading them to experience or express the same emotions as the individual. In this way, emotions felt by one person can spread throughout a system. Goldenberg and Gross 2020 found that emotional contagion may be particularly powerful on social media, as it tends to amplify both negative and positive emotional messages, at least on Twitter. Specifically, the intensity of emotional expression predicted the amount of both likes and retweets received on Twitter. But this effect was stronger for positive compared to negative emotions. That is, both more positive and negative messages get more attention on the website, but positive messages tend to gain the most. A similar analysis from Brady Grantman and Van Babel, 2020, examined the use of words that were overtly moral, overtly emotional, a combination of the two, or neutral on Twitter, and tracked the virality of tweets containing those words. Moral words are things like ethics, mercy, or lewd. Emotional words are things like love, fear, and sad. Combination moral-emotional words are things like shame, cruel, or honor, while neutral words are things like olive, maize, or coast. Although that last one can get a bit emotional if someone were to point out, say, that the West Coast is in fact not the best coast.
What is wrong with the West Coast? Oh, nothing. I love it here. Everyone's so numbed by the sun that if you use a 3-syllable word, they think you're a professor.
They found that tweets with a greater attention capture value, that is, the use of more emotional or moral words, were associated with greater expected retweet counts. By virtue of likes and retweets, Twitter and other social media sites incentivize users to be more emotional to receive that validation in the form of attention. This creates a kind of heinous cycle of emotional contagion, wherein users are encouraged to be more emotive because emotive posts are rewarded by the like and sharing systems of social media sites, And by virtue of emotive messages being more liked and more shared, more people see them and therefore experience the same vicarious emotions of the poster, being in turn themselves more likely to be more emotive as well. Forever and ever ad infinitum.
And Dad will just keep doing it back and forth with the same poop.
So the question is this cycle of emotional posting potentially harmful? And is the de-ranking of posts and curating content, as we know for sure that sites like Facebook and YouTube do, really in the best interest of our emotional health? Is it in our benefit to remove negative emotions from the system? Well, it might make sense to remove negative content from a cycle if negative messages are more prevalent than positive ones, right? So we have to ask the question, are they? While all emotional messages are shared more than non-emotional messages, Fan et al. 2014 found that at least on the Chinese social media site and Twitter analog Weibo, anger may be more influential than joy. The researchers assessed 70 million messages posted by nearly 300,000 users and categorized emotions by using emoticons, the most common of which represented joy, sadness, anger, and disgust. Within the data visualization, we can pretty immediately see how emotion tends to gather into clusters, represented visually here, with red nodes representing anger, green joy, blue sadness, and black disgust. Anger tends to be the emotion that clusters most closely together with itself compared to other assessed emotions. Moreover, anger was also the most strongly correlated emotion with other emotions, indicating that even when one is expressing joy or sadness, anger is always close by.
That's my secret, Cat. I'm always angry.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
Let's be as fair as possible, and assume that maybe Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are really looking out for our health. Or at least that's a reasonable excuse for emitting and promoting content. And the reason why is because research has long been illustrative of the influence of social networks on our own well-being. In another infamous experiment, Christakis and Fowler 2007 examined the longitudinal effects of social networks on obesity. Subjects in this analysis were recruited from the Farmingham Heart Study, a long-term analysis of health in more than 12,000 Americans between 1971 and 2003. Subjects were asked to provide information about themselves, their spouse, children, parents, and close friends, whose addresses were all included, such as to identify physical proximity, allowing for a network analysis. They found, as we can see visualized in the data, that obese people gather in network clusters, as larger nodes in these images indicate a higher BMI, which is frankly a bit rude, and with yellow indicating someone who is clinically obese. The risk of obesity among those who were socially networked with an obese person was about 45% higher in the observed network than in a random network. This decreased by degrees of separation, such that after 4 degrees, there was no such relationship. That is, if a close friend or relative is overweight, you are at about 45% more risk of being overweight as well. If it's a friend of a friend, this decreases to 20% risk, and 10% when it's a friend of a friend of a friend. Just goes to show, people who say you can't run from your problems are wrong. Interestingly, only social distance presented this effect, not physical distance, meaning it doesn't matter how close you live to your obese friend, but rather how close you are socially for this to manifest, how often you talk on the phone. The likelihood of obesity was stronger for mutual friends in a network and personal friends, particularly those of the same sex, than it was even for family members. Specifically, for friends, if one friend becomes obese, the chance of their close friend of the same sex becoming obese is increased by 71%. Clearly, the things we see our friends do create a normative perception of what is socially acceptable within a social network. And because physical distance had little to no effect on the increase in obesity, we should expect the same type of obesity clusters between friends posting on social media, right? Well, such a connection was studied in an analysis of posts about food from Twitter users from Abar, Mayova, and Weber 2015. The researchers collected 892,000 tweets posted by over 400,000 users from the United States, which resulted in tweets that used words related to food or restaurant chains. The most commonly mentioned foods were pizza, chocolate, chicken, ice cream, and apples. The researchers used the average calorie estimate of food types, which, hey, is a bit spurious because how many calories are in a burger can vary widely from a lean beef burger on a sandwich thin to a Beatus burger from the Heart Attack Grill. Hey, it's the best way to assess a large dataset like this. These tweets were then isolated by state of origin and then related to local obesity rates. Foods with the highest calorie content originated most commonly from southern states such as Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, while the lowest calorie content originated from western states such as Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana, as well as the Northeast, such as Vermont.
That's about all. Peace out.
There was a strong correlation between the total amount of food tweeted about and the local levels of obesity and diabetes. This could even be tracked to the county level, wherein for areas with at least 200 users, the regional relationship between food tweets and outcomes was 0.6 for obesity and 0.5 for diabetes. With this in mind, tweets about high-caloric food were actually able to predict the obesity of a given area. Moreover, when friend networks were assessed with this relationship in mind, the increased probability of obesity estimated by food names mentioned was found to increase further as the number of friends and mentions on social media with high obesity scores increased. The more friends posting food-related content, the higher the potential for obesity. Not just then does it seem that personal social networks increase obesity based on what we see our friends doing in real life, this effect can extend to relative strangers who merely know each other or mention each other online. We can see similar effects of social media on potential behavioral contagion by examining exposure to Facebook posts regarding the importance of organ donors and an actual increase in signups for organ donation as seen in a study from Cameron et al. 2013. In May of 2012, Facebook implemented a new feature that allowed users to identify themselves as organ donors. After selecting organ donor on their profile, users were immediately offered a link to their appropriate state donor registry, and after either registering or confirming their existing status as a donor, their Facebook friends were all made aware of the new profile change. On the first day of this implementation, online registrations for organ donation was 21 times higher than normal, such that while on an average day, about 500 people sign up as organ donors, on the 1st of May 2012, more than 10,000 people did, all while their Facebook friends suddenly started updating their own profiles with their organ donor status. After 13 days, however, this effect completely dropped off the map. And while existing donors continued to update their profiles, new registrations dropped to 0. Interestingly, there was also a small offline effect here, meaning more people than usual actually went to the DMV to register rather than just signing up online, but this too returned to basal levels after only 2 days. The total effect was that for 13 days in May of 2012, 5.8 times as many people signed up as organ donors than typically would have. This effect was more pronounced in some states than in others, indicating that social media contagion likely interacts with word-of-mouth effects. This manifested as some states, such as Georgia and Illinois, seen an increase in registration of 100 times more than average, while others, such as Florida and Michigan, saw an increase of only 6.9% on the first day of this program's rollout. Interestingly, states that had a higher Facebook effect on the first day continued to have a higher Facebook effect on subsequent days. But again, after 2 weeks, this effect diminished to 0. As such, social media can influence behavior in a positive way, but probably only if you gamify it as a badge to be shown off online, and even then, the effect is short-lived and quickly becomes passé. That doesn't mean we shouldn't encourage positive behavior through online campaigns, as they clearly work, but I wonder how many people signed up to be organ donors to get a little badge on their Facebook profile who now have no idea that they're still registered organ donors. Given that the Kramer study we looked at in the first part of this video sought to manipulate emotions on a social network, with some pretty observable success, it should come as no surprise that the same type of phenomena have been observed in offline social networks, as seen in Fowler and Christakis 2008. Utilizing the same data set that I previously referenced in the study of the social transmission of obesity, this analysis looked at self-reports of happiness and found similar results. Much like with obesity, happiness occurs in clusters, as seen here, with happy people being represented with yellow and unhappy people represented with blue, while green represents moderate levels of happiness. The social closeness we possess to someone else who is happy subsequently influences our own levels of reported happiness. Specifically, having a close relationship with a happy person increased the likelihood that we would also report happiness by 15.3%, while this decreased to 9.8% potential for happiness at 2 degrees of relational separation and to 5.6% at 3 degrees of separation. The more people within a social network that reported happiness, the more likely the subject was to report being happy upon subsequent analysis. including more distal nodes in the social network. Unlike obesity, location mattered for happiness, in that close friends, close mutual friends, and neighbors had a greater influence on happiness than did distant relationships. These data indicate that emotional contagion is actually more influenced by real-life proximity than its contagion of social norms, such as obesity. An emotion may be less contagious, actually, than a behavior. But also that we can influence the happiness of those around us, to a degree, just by being happier ourselves. And vice versa. Going back to social media, we can see how emotional contagion similarly affects posting behaviors by looking to Ferrara and Yang 2015. The researchers conducted an observational non-experimental study wherein subjects logged into their Twitter accounts and were exposed to various tweets from a pool of 3,800 accounts an hour before tweeting themselves, and were asked to categorize the nature of users' tweets as negative, positive, or neutral. The emotional valence of subjects' own tweet was then categorized by research assistants. Prior to posting a negative tweet, users on average were exposed to 22% negative tweets, 45% neutral, and 33% positive tweets. This signifies an overexposure to 4.34% more negative tweets at the expense of 1.09% fewer positive tweets, compared to the average negativity of Twitter. Similarly, prior to posting a positive tweet, any user in this dataset was exposed to on average 16% negative tweets, 45% neutral tweets, and 39% positive ones. This accounts for an overexposure of 4.5% more positive tweets at the expense of 1.29% negative ones when compared to average usage. While again not experimental, the results of this analysis indicate that people exposed to more negative emotions on Twitter are statistically more likely to post a negative tweet, with the inverse being the same for positive exposure to positive tweets. Further examining the existing emotional states versus the potential for emotional contagion, the researchers found that about 80% of users have up to 50% of their tweets affected by emotional contagion, while the remainder 20% still exhibit a very high susceptibility and demonstrate that more than 50% of the content that they post is also subject to emotional contagion as well. That is, at any given time, about half of the tweets that you see are products to some degree of emotional contagion present on the site. Thus, if Twitter as an ecosystem is feeling particularly negative on a day, like say after the spread of hashtag SuperStraight, which resulted in tons of death threats being posted, then the emotional contagion hypothesis, as evidenced in these data, would suggest that the entire website will become up to 50% more negative as a whole, even for people not directly involved in the hashtag, so long as they happen to be exposed to anyone else potentially exposed to the network. This results in a perpetual cycle of toxicity, wherein when one negative topic begins trending on Twitter, it legitimately seems to spread negativity throughout the site, resulting in the posting of even more negative content, which in turn only produces more negative content, and so on and so forth until something else starts trending. Basically, it's a human tantrum spiral. Further proof that Twitter is a game of Dwarf Fortress that's gotten out of hand.
In the chaos, a mother dropped her toddler into a shallow pool of water. The child drowned, causing the mother to go into a tantrum and attack an experienced axe dwarf, who decapitated her.
Have you ever noticed that there seem to be days when Twitter is just far more insufferable than others? Well, these data could explain why that's the case. So take some solace in the knowledge that perhaps a particularly toxic day on the website is possibly the result of some Homestuck fan flipping their ThinkPan in a random thread a week ago. Twitter posting is rife with emotional contagion. On the positive side of things, however, further analysis revealed that individual users who are more likely to be affected by emotional contagion on the website are actually less influenced by negative emotions than they are positive ones, which means, at least among people who are more likely to catch the feels from the general state of Twitter discourse, are more likely to spread positivity than negativity. But wow, they sure hide it well. Similar findings were reported in a study from Coviello et al. 2014 in an analysis of Facebook posts and emotional contagion. As with Ferrara and Yang's exploration of Twitter emotional contagion, it would be impossible to experimentally introduce emotions into the network on a large scale. So to overcome this roadblock, the researchers used nature itself to manipulate the emotions of users by tracking Facebook posts made in parts of the country during rain showers, because rainy weather has sometimes been associated with negative emotional states.
We'll admit that the weather plays a significant role in the way they feel, right? There's even that disorder.
SAD. Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah. Well, who's to say that it doesn't work the other way around?
It actually has been specifically examined in its effects on social media, as seen in an analysis of Twitter from Hannick et al. 2012, who found that the number of positively valenced tweets on the website was correlated both to temperature and humidity in the regions from which the tweets originated, such that people tended to post more positive tweets on warmer, sunnier days. Going back to Coviello and Facebook, they tracked not only regional rainfall, but also the number of positive and negative Facebook posts made year-long, accounting for major US holidays, which typically, albeit not always, are periods of happiness. As of data collection in 2011, there were generally more positive posts on Facebook than negative posts, and positivity spiked when we might expect it to, on major holidays, particularly Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, while negative posts declined on those dates. Now, I know a lot of people sad post on holidays like Valentine's Day and Christmas, but the data indicate that any negativity is a drop in the bucket compared to positivity on these days. Some cities also tended to have more positivity than did others, with only 30% of daily posts from New York City, Philly, and Detroit being positive, compared to 43% from Reno, Phoenix, or Albuquerque. Moreover, as anticipated, fewer positive and more negative posts were made to Facebook on days wherein it was raining. This negativity had a smaller effect on the emotional contagion of the website than did positivity. Each additional positive post decreased the number of friends' negative posts by 1.8, and each additional negative post decreased the number of friends' positive posts by 1.26. For example, a rainy day in New York City directly yielded an additional 1,500 negative posts from users in New York City, and about 700 negative posts made by their friends elsewhere outside of New York. If something as seemingly innocuous as nasty weather can affect negativity or positivity made on Facebook posts, and these emotions can spread across the entire nation, clearly emotional contagion via social media is a powerful thing, and one that is likely far more powerful when concerning something more serious than whether or not it's a rainy day in New York. Much like social networks, there can be positive effects like increasing organ donation, but even more negative effects than just feeling sad or eating an extra meal.
A succulent Chinese meal!
That can be spread via emotional contagion, and at a time when many people are stuck inside and relying increasingly on internet-based communication, the influence of negative emotional contagion may be at an all-time high, as seen in research from Gao et al. 2020, who examined exposure to social media and reported mental health issues during the COVID-19 crisis in Chinese participants. They found that increased use of social media in early 2020 was related to increased reports of depression, and similarly accompanied by decreased reports of personal health. Social media usage was positively related to reports of anxiety. Given that this study also found that 82% of participants are frequently exposed to social media, depression and anxiety may be spreading socially now via social media than ever before. But this isn't really new. It might be worse right now, but it's not novel. A study of the relationship between depression and anxiety and social media use was assessed by Primick et al. 2017. 2.7 thousand US participants were polled on their general levels of anxiety and depression, as well as the time they spent on social media and the number of social media sites that he or she used, including Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, Vine, Snapchat, and Reddit. RIP in peace, Vine. The best of all social media, perhaps because you limited your post length to the span of a D&D turn.
Life was starting to make sense, but then there was a fucking jar of rice at the bus stop for some.
About 1/3 of all respondents reported some degree of anxiety and depression. Only 3% of subjects reported using no social media sites, and a similarly minuscule amount, 3%, reported using all 11. Both high use of multiple social media platforms and higher total minutes per day spent using social media were associated with increased reported depression and anxiety. For increasing multi-platform use, depression for users of many platforms was 3.1 times more common, while anxiety was 3.3 times more common. While there could be plenty of confounding variables here, given we know that emotions can be contagious via social media, it is possible that anxiety and depression are transmitted via that contagion. We might think then that people who talk about depressing content online are worse off in terms of their mental health, but that isn't necessarily the case, and instead, sometimes talking about an issue can be cathartic, as seen in a longitudinal study of Reddit communities from Park and Conway 2017. The researchers sought to see if members and regular users of the subreddits r/depression used more negative words, including words related to anxiety, anger, and sadness, as well as swear words, compared to other health-related subreddits, including r/diabetes and r/IBS, as well as a positivity-based subreddit, r/happy. First of all, depression has nearly 6 times the total number of overall posts as r/happy, indicating that more people are talking about emotional distress than happiness on the specific subreddits on this site. The researchers utilized a linguistic inquiry and word count program to assess the types of words used on these subreddits. They found that members of the depression community generally showed an increased use of positive words and a decreased use of negative ones, as the number of interactions on the subreddit increased, despite what we might expect to the contrary. Overall, members of all communities used more positive emotional words and less negative emotional words as the number of interactions increased with time. Interestingly, there was a lack of increase in positivity on r/happy compared to the other online health communities. However, that could be because r/happy members are encouraged to only share positive thoughts or stories in general. Often, subreddits like r/depression are, for lack of a less loaded term, safe spaces for relatively anonymous people to share their true feelings without much concern for real-world shame or repercussion, something described as Rubin 1983 as the strangers on a train effect. This unloading of emotions may feel freeing and be beneficial for our mental well-being. Thus, sharing information that is not necessarily positive online does not preclude negative emotional contagion. Instead, positive emotions can be contagious even if the emotional origin is a place of negativity or hardship. So if current events like the coup and even a rainy day can negatively influence the emotions of others on social media, what about the words of influential figures, particularly the orange man who is bad? And can one person actually make the internet a more cancerous place? Well, for answers, let's look to Kwon and Grzud, 2017, who examined 24,000 comments on videos posted to Donald Trump's official YouTube account during the 2016 election to see if the emotional tone of an original parent comment in a thread produced emotional contagion and mimicry from responding commenters or child comments. Specifically, the researchers were interested in the spread of rage, which was operationalized with the use of swear words. They found evidence for not just contagion, but anger escalation, as the average number of swear words in a parent comment was 0.41 words, but there were 1.4 swear words on average in the child comments. Swearing appeared almost twice more frequently in children comments, 42%, than in parent comments. Moreover, swearing in children comments was 1.7 times more likely to occur when the parent comment contained swearing than not. As we might expect with emotional contagion, it took some time for the rage to really percolate though, as swearing in the response comments was more commonly directed at an old parent comment rather than new parent comments. While I'm not sure to what degree you can really blame Trump for these specific responses, Trump has certainly been rude and impolite, to put it mildly, which might have created the environment of negatively valenced emotions that saw these kinds of original responses and then only spiraled into self-sustaining rage. That's how contagion works. You might watch a video of Trump, go to the comments and see a sea of rage, responding yourself with some rage, and then only a week later trying to recall why you were enraged in the first place and think, oh yeah, I was mad because of Trump, when really it was the emotions of another person that induced that effect. Maybe that's why the White House YouTube channel has been turning off comments on Biden's videos. If emotions can transfer via social media through simple pieces of text, something low in media richness, we might assume that emotions would be even more contagious through a video format, which was analyzed in assessment of vlog posts to YouTube from Rosenbusch, Evans, and Zeelenberg 2019. The researchers gathered a sample of over 2,000 vlog-styled videos from creators with over 10,000 subscribers, and utilized the closed caption feature of YouTube to determine the usage of positive, negative, and neutral language, and correlated the language used by vloggers with comments left on the video to indicate emotional contagion. That is, to make evident the emotional contagion hypothesis, one would expect happy vlogs to have mostly positive comments, while sad vlogs would have mostly negative comments. At first glance, the results were not so simple as to indicate that positive videos equal positive comments, but this may be due to the fact that individual vlogger characteristics may influence the strength of emotional transfers between the video and the spectator, at least for some emotions. You might not expect to see a lot of sad emotional contagion on a Nikocado avocado video, for example. they found that an increase in average emotionality by 10% on the part of a vlogger, positive or negative, predicted an increase of roughly 5 to 6.5% of audience emotionality for all emotional variables, whereas an equivalent video that expressed little to no emotions, the control, predicted about 2.5 to 3.5% increase in emotional expression in the comments. There was no significant interaction between contagion effects and channel size. These data indicate that the emotions of a YouTuber can influence public emotions of the viewers, at least in terms of the comments, and as such, if a YouTuber uses positive words in 10 out of 10 of their sentences, we would reasonably expect a use of positive words in 1 out of 2 sentences in a single given reply comment, with the same being the case for negativity, joy, and anger. Positive emotions and joy had a more sporadic effect than did negative emotions and anger, indicating a closer relationship between negatively valenced words and negative comments than positively valenced words and positive comments. As a function of emotional contagion, YouTubers to whom we often experience parasocial relationships with are able to influence our own emotional state, at least as those emotions manifest themselves in the comment section. Interestingly, this may not just be a product of emotional reciprocation, that is, expecting the other communicator to feel the same way that we do, as seen in a study from Moy et al. 2018, wherein subjects interacted with a research assistant confederate via webcam. Dutch participants were placed in a room with a computer equipped with a webcam and asked to complete a series of tangram puzzles with another supposed participant. The two described the puzzle while faces were shown on the screen. In one condition, the confederate smiled several times while completing the task or during the introduction period, while in the other condition, the confederate did not smile either during the task nor during the introduction period to the participant at all while the facial expressions of the participant were recorded via webcam. Trained coders looked for movement in the zygomaticus major, the lip corner puller of the face, as well as the opicularis oculi, the cheek raiser of the face, both muscles related to smiling. There was more observed movement in the ZM and the OC when subjects saw the confederate smiling both during the task and during the introduction, but the results were particularly prominent during the introduction period, in that when the confederate smiled, the participant was significantly more likely to smile and raise their cheeks as well. Not like that. Seeing someone else smile, therefore, as in a YouTube video, may make us more prone to smile ourselves as a form of emotional contagion, but not necessarily social comparison. What is social comparison? Well, it's a topic of increasing importance as it relates to social media, in that many young people are growing up with social media influencers as their role models, against whom they will inevitably compare themselves.
My main goal is to blow up and then act like I don't know nobody.
We always compare ourselves with media figures to some degree, but social media figures are a bit different, with their frequent, personal postings creating a perspective of a parasocial relationship, to a degree that other media figures probably don't have, with viewers often seeing them as friends rather than distant stars. As such, we might expect that influencers would have a unique effect on emotional contagion, which was studied in the context of Instagram from Choi and Kim 2020. In their first quasi-experiment, subjects' basal levels of happiness and life satisfaction were initially assessed. They then scrolled through 10 posts visible from their own Instagram accounts and were asked to rate the emotional messages of these posts, report on whether or not they compared themselves socially to the poster, and their levels of emotion were again measured after the exposure. They found that exposure to positive Instagram posts tended to heighten positive affect, although the effect fell just short of statistical significance, but also lowered negative feelings. In contrast, social comparison had a stronger impact on envy than did emotional valence, meaning that we envy people when we compare ourselves to them, not just necessarily when they post positive messages about their lives. Instead, exposure to positive posts tended to induce more positive affect and increase life satisfaction. In toto, respondents experienced more positive affect and less negative affect when they browsed others' positive posts than when they browsed negative posts, regardless of whether or not they socially compared themselves to the poster. This means that emotions can spread even from people that we aren't directly comparing ourselves to in society. A second study tasked subjects with keeping a diary for 7 days, describing the types of posts they read about on Instagram. Their emotions were measured during this process, and their life satisfaction was measured before and after the 7-day period. Positive affect was higher and negative affect was lower on days when subjects browsed more positive posts than on days when they browsed less positive posts. Life satisfaction was related to making social comparisons to Instagram famous people, but not emotional valence of posts over a 7-day period. Comparing ourselves to others can impact our life satisfaction, but emotional contagion mostly only affects us in short-term bursts. Thus, an influx of negative posts on social media is unlikely to seriously affect our emotional state long-term, but could affect our life satisfaction if we see a lot of positive posts from super wealthy people with seemingly perfect lives that ours can just never live up to. But it doesn't seem as if that's always the case that social media makes us sad. Maybe sometimes, as we've seen over the course of this video, it's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to emotional contagion. There's some good, there's some bad. So with all of that in mind, let's come to a few conclusions. With everything we've covered regarding emotional contagion, both positive and negative, as well as the potential real-world effects of emotional and social contagion on things like BMI, organ donation, depression, and anxiety, but also positive emotions like joy as well as increasing smiling and life satisfaction, even when it comes from people sharing sad feelings, is it really in the best interest of social media sites to curate what users see to protect them from some of the potentially harmful effects of social media contagion? Some studies seem to find that positivity is far more prevalent online than is negativity, while others find the antithesis. While some research illustrates the potentially dangerous effects of seeing a bunch of sad posting, a free internet is also a place that allows people to share their insecurities and problems, often in a pseudonymous environment that prevents that sensitive information from affecting our real lives, and that sharing can be good for our mental health. Social media communication is different from face-to-face communication, undoubtedly, but emotions and thoughts and opinions don't suddenly become virulent just because a funny meme is virulent, and even when they do, these effects tend to be short-lived. People stopped signing up to be organ donors within 2 weeks of Facebook promoting it, and while emotions online can absolutely be contagious, it usually seems to occur in small bursts, with the most harmful effects likely only impacting extremely heavy users, people who use 8 or more social media sites multiple times a day. Social media affects what we see and content that is promoted to us. That's unquestionable at this point, and shouldn't really be a surprise. But is curating content really in the best interest of users, even if it means removing negative content? Further, is it even in the best interest of social media sites, the entire purpose of which, from a financial standpoint, is to keep eyes on the page to do this? Have you ever experienced social media platforms hiding some content from you while promoting other content that you wouldn't normally seek out, but ended up enjoying anyway, maybe? Do you think social media platforms have an obligation to users to give them access to the raw back-end feeds that we know exist if they so desire? Should we be able to control what social media sites allow us to see? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you liked this video, be sure to hit like and subscribe. You can also help out the channel by checking out my sponsor, Surfshark VPN, or by going down to the description and supporting the channel via my Patreon, my Subscribestar, or by checking out some merch from my merch store. I want to give, as always, an enormous thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar. You guys are amazing. You have been so incredibly important over the last couple months as YouTube has been demoting my content. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe it's because I talk about stuff like this. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching to the end, and as always, dear friends, Altana Volt.